We are giving you a pre-training camp 53-man roster prediction, that and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
Your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this Monday episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listen or view every single day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can follow us on Twitter. I am James Yarcho at JYarcho_Bucs, joined by my UNC toe shoe covered
black toe. Yes.
Black toe. I thought it was North Carolina toe. Anyway, sneakerhead extraordinaire David Harrison on Twitter at DHarrison82. We are both credentialed members of the media covering your Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I'm the deputy editor of SB Nation's BucsNation.com. David is a staff writer over at BucsGameDay.com, Sports Illustrated's Fan Nation site, covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We are here every Monday through Friday, along with our everydayers who we love and support so much.
Yeah, I don't think they classified as a black toe, but it's okay. It's got a black toe. On today's episode of Locked On Bucs, we're going to discuss our early projections for the Buccaneers' initial 53-man roster and depth chart breakdown heading into training. But before we do that, I have to tell you that this episode is sponsored by LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Who is making the cut in the Locked On Bucs defensive part of the roster? That's going to come up a little bit later here on the show. But first, we got to start on the offensive side of the ball because offense sells tickets, but defense wins championships, and championships come later than the ticket sales. Therefore, we're going to start with what sells the tickets, James. That's how I'm going to justify this, even though that's not actually the way we did this. But you know what? That's okay. Nobody knows that because I'm not going to say that on the episode. Starting with the quarterback position. We've got three quarterbacks going into the season. Baker Mayfield, Kyle Trask, John Wolford are the three quarterbacks, and they are in that order on the depth chart. So we've lost all of our Florida Gator fans. They're no longer listening to the program. So welcome Seminoles fans to today's episode. Look, I just think, James, when you talk about we talk about the history of Bruce Arians and, kind of deciding between the Bucs and the Browns on whether, which team he was going to coach. And basically it was between Baker and Jameis. So he wanted to coach Baker to a certain extent. We talked about Dave Canales, the offensive coordinator this year, who was quarterbacks coach last year, previously passing game coordinator in Seattle. But either way, he was part of the brain trust that was trying to get the Seahawks to trade for Baker Mayfield when he was ultimately traded to the Carolina Panthers. So there's that connection. And then there's just the experience factor of it. And, Kyle Trask can't do anything about his lack of experience because playing behind Tom Brady, nobody's getting any experience unless you're Matt Castle, and that's a freak incident. You know what I mean? But the bottom line is when you're trying to continue to win, and that's what the Buccaneers have said all offseason, is they're still trying to compete in the NFC South for a playoff spot. You typically that level of experience matters. And then, of course, there's the leadership qualities that we've talked about. And not only have we talked about it, not only has Coach Bowles talked about it, other players have been talking about it during that period. I think that's very significant coming into this training camp session.
Yeah, I agree completely. It's no secret that, I have believed from day one that Baker Mayfield was going to be the starter. I'm not going to change my mind now. I reserve the right to change it 4 weeks from now after we've actually seen how things are going in training camp, but this is pre-training camp. So this is how we think things will shake out. And I think that Baker Mayfield is going to end up winning that starting quarterback job. And I said as much on our bold predictions episode, for those that didn't hear it, that came out on Friday, that I think Baker Mayfield's going to start 16 out of 17 games this year. So, yeah, no reservations for me about our quarterback depth chart.
Right. And there's no disrespect intended towards Kyle Trask. It just is the situation that we're looking at. Moving on to the running back position. We've got 4 running backs going into the initial 53-man roster. And on the depth chart, they will be listed as such. Rashad White, number 1. No surprise there. Keyshawn Vaughn is our RB2, followed by Chase Edmonds, 3rd, and then Sean Tucker, RB4. But on the initial 53-man roster, James.
Yeah, I do think that Sean Tucker is going to be the number 2 back on this team by about mid-season. But that is not how things are shaking out in training camp, which is why we have him towards the end. He was dealing with an injury, probably would have been drafted if he wasn't dealing with an injury. So, they gave an undrafted rookie free agent guaranteed money in order to get him here because they want him. So I think he's going to get ample opportunity and he's going to work his way up the depth chart. And all due respect to Keyshawn Vaughn, he's had his opportunities, hasn't really done anything to really impress. Chase Edmonds has his flashes, but Sean Tucker is a young dude coming out of college. He was highly coveted, so it's not going to surprise me that he'll end up the number 2 back before too long.
Yeah, Sean Tucker, a priority free agent in the undrafted free agent pool, so certainly could see him climb that ladder. Going to the tight end group, we got 3 tight ends. Depth chart wise, we've got K. Dotton up front, which of course we do because James Yarcho is still a host on this program. And number 2, though, we got Payne Durham as the tight end number 2, followed by O'Keefe in third slot. And James, for me, Payne Durham, I just think as much as O'Keefe surprised us last year with his receiving ability and how much better he was at that than I think most of us expected him to be, Payne Durham kind of is that type of tight end already coming into the league. And I think that by the end of this thing, I don't know if day 1 O'Keefe starts as tight end number 3, but I think by the end of this thing, if you're in 12 personnel, really it could be a matchup situation. If you need an extra blocker, then you might put Co out there. But if you need an extra potential blocker, but also potential receiver, I think it's Payne Durham.
Yeah, Keefe is going to keep that role that he's already had, right? He's going to go out there and he's going to block and he's going to block and he's going to block. And then all of a sudden they're going to surprise you and they're going to throw him the ball because you are so used to him blocking. You kind of get lulled into that false sense of security. But yeah, and K. Dotton is the tight end 1 on the depth chart. And it has nothing to do with me being here. It has to do with the fact that he's the tight end 1 on this football team. I don't know who you would put above him if you were doing this episode by yourself.
Rob Gronkowski is who I put above him. We've got 6 wide receivers. Listen, Antoine said he might come back. We've got 6 wide. He didn't. Stop it. We have 6 wide receivers on our initial 53 depth chart projection here. Mike Evans, wide receiver 1, because of course Chris Godwin was number 2, really 1A, 1B. Russell Gage, if he's healthy, obviously is number 3. But then we've got Trey Palmer, the rookie out of Nebraska, taking that 4th spot. Devin Tompkins taking the 5th spot, and Kalen Geiger taking the 6th spot. And what I think is interesting here, James, is Trey Palmer. So Devin Tompkins, a lot of people have been excited about. We were excited about, definitely as a return specialist. But Trey Palmer, I think, kind of fits this team as a more holistic type of receiver. Again, we still have to see what happens when the pads come on. That's obviously going to tell a lot. But Trey also has return experience, both in punt and kick returns. So I think that is a big factor here. And if you're Devin Tompkins, you kind of have a little bit of pressure on you to show that you can do more than just return. Because if you can return and Trey can return, it might come down to the guy who can do more on offense if called upon, because David Moore is also on this roster. And David Moore is a veteran Seattle Seahawk transplant. So he knows Dave Canales. He knows the system. He knows the scheme. I don't think Dave Moore is just here to get some experience in coaching so maybe he can turn into a coaching career. I think he's here to be a veteran that surprises people and makes this roster. So keep an eye on him. But I think in our initial 53, in our initial depth chart, we go with the young talent because of the potential.
Yeah, Dave Moore was a hard cut for us to make when we were trying to sort all of this stuff out. Now, I personally believe that Devin Tompkins is going to be the wide receiver 4. You kind of talked me into Trey Palmer a little bit. It ended up being one of those coin flip kind of decisions. Either way, these are guys that are threats in multiple facets of the game. So it may even be a situation where they split the special teams duty and one's on punts, one's on kicks, so you don't have the same guy getting blasted on both facets of the special teams. But Trey Palmer, he has all of the skills that you're looking for to be that number 4. He has to prove that he can do it at this level. He's got the speed, he's got the hands. It's a matter of, can he put it all together and outperform Devin Tompkins? I'm in a wait and see approach on that one. I think Devin might end up emerging, but either way, it's going to be interesting to see how that battle shakes out for sure.
Yeah, certainly fair to not want to put all your eggs in the Trey Palmer basket yet. Again, haven't even seen him in pads yet, so that's going to be a big question mark. Offensive line, we've got 10 of them. I don't know if there's a whole lot of question on who the group would be coming into training camp. Tristan Wirfs, Matt Filer, Ryan Jensen, Cody Malk, Luke Gedeke, your starters: Brandon Walton, Nick Leverett, Robert Hainsey, Aaron Stinney, John Molshon. I don't know. I always feel like I say his name wrong, and I don't. but that's who he is. Wrapping up our depth chart here for the offensive line gives us 26 offensive players. We're going to continue our discussion and pre-training camp, initial 53-man roster and depth chart in a moment. Flipping over the defense. That's next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And we're going to have that conversation thanks to our friends over at LinkedIn Jobs. Today's episode of Locked On Bucs is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business, and you want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Once you get your job posted, throw that purple hashtag hiring frame on your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you are indeed hiring. Simple tools, not Indeed hiring, LinkedIn Jobs hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Continuing today's conversation here on Locked On Bucs, we are talking about our initial 53-man roster, pre-training camp projections, and depth chart projection, doing all of it right here before the training camp really gets started. Players, of course, are starting to get into the building. Quarterbacks are in, rookies are in, veterans are coming, coaches are coming, meetings are happening, and then practices will be going on this week. We'll have all kinds of notes and observations, and we will start to see if we tweak these projections and depth chart predictions as we go through it. Every day, of course, you'll be here for all of it, as you always are, and we appreciate you as always. And James is going to interrupt me now.
Yes, I am. We're not going to tweak anything because you and I are geniuses and we're perfect. And not only are all of our bold predictions going to come true, but so is our depth chart because
David Moore would like to have a conversation about that. So looking at the defensive side of the ball, we've got 26 offensive players. So we've got a little bit of room here for defense. Start with the defensive ends. Kalijah Kancey, first round pick. Obviously, he's on the depth chart as one of the starting D ends. Logan Hall on the other side. And then Patrick O'Connor is our third DN, and we're actually only carrying 3 DNs into our initial 53-man roster depth chart projection.
Yeah, Logan Hall needs to take a serious step forward this year, along with somebody else that we're going to talk about in a little bit. But I think there's a method to our defensive end madness that we'll get to here when we talk about the defensive tackles.
Certainly, and looking at the defensive tackles, you got Vita Vea manning in the front there, of course. Greg Gaines behind him on the depth chart for defensive tackles, and Dedrin Sanat is the third defensive tackle. So we're taking 3 DNs, 3 D tackles. I don't know if this is where you were going to go with it, James, but Greg Gaines, a little bit of a versatile piece, could play on the edge potentially. Defensive line coach Casey Rogers did say that he sees him more as a nose, but again, also referenced last year, they did move Akeem Hicks around a little bit. I think he wants to kind of keep Greg Gaines solidified if he can, but if they need to move him around, they have some confidence that they can.
I think it's a situation where it's going to harken back to having Vita and Ndamukong Suh out there together. I feel like they're going to want to do the same thing with Greg Gaines. They are going to want Vita and Gaines on the field at the same time. You add Kalijah Kancey to that mix, or Logan Hall if he takes that step forward, but they're going to want that nastiness on the interior to kind of collapse the pocket. It's going to depend on the packages, of course. You know, you're going to have guys going in and out based on what defense they're running, but I don't see this as a situation where Greg Gaines was brought in to back up Vita Vea. They want those guys out there together. So I think that's kind of where we get away with having 3 of each, is because we have one guy in particular that we know is going to be on the field and kind of bouncing between the nose tackle and then the 3-4 end kind of spot.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there were times when Ndamukong Suh was on the team so that they would have Vita Vea over the nose, and then they'd have Ndamukong lined up in the A gap, B gap, what have you, really in a more traditional defensive tackle type of position, but he's still listed as a defensive end. And I think that's kind of the flexibility of a 3-man defensive front, is you can shift them as you need to get the matchups that you want to. And then you look at the roster, could you form a 4-man front out of this defensive line like you mentioned? Absolutely. You put Vea, Gaines out there in the middle as like 4-3 D tackles, quote unquote. Kancey and Hall as your defensive ends, and you can still potentially bring a guy out there as a 5th pass rusher, a guy like Shaq Barrett standing up over the edge or something like that. So a lot of versatility. We know that Todd Bowles likes to get creative with his defensive fronts, especially, but his defensive alignments just in general. Never forget seeing a safety lineup over the center. That was amazing, and it worked, which was even more amazing. Speaking of Shaquille Barrett, outside linebackers, Shaq is obviously at the top of that list. Joe Tryon-Shoyinka coming into his final season before the Buccaneers have to decide whether or not they are going to secure him for a 5th year. Yaya Diaby, the draft pick that everybody is really excited about. Anthony Nelson, kind of the steady veteran backup at this point in time in his career. Jose Ramirez has created some buzz. And then we're adding Cam Gill to the list as well. So 6 outside linebackers coming with us on our initial roster.
Yeah, the biggest thing for me here is Jose Ramirez and Cam Gill at the end of this depth chart. And here's my take on this. Feel free to disagree with me or feel free to tell me how right I am, because that's just how I am. I feel like Jose Ramirez is the more likely candidate between he and Cam Gill to be cut. And I think with Jose, it's going to boil down to the special teams work. We know Cam Gill will go out there and do work on special teams, but I also know how excited Jason Light was about this pick and how much they like Jose Ramirez. Doesn't mean they hit on it. Doesn't mean he's going to pan out at this level, but it seems to me that Jose is the more likely candidate to get on the field at outside linebacker than Cam Gill is. But if Jose doesn't show out on special teams during training camp to be able to get that opportunity, that they are going to view him as an expendable piece in order to keep others that do contribute on special teams. If that makes sense.
I mean, that's a fair assessment. I think 6th-round pick, look, if he ends up on practice squad, that's okay for a year. We'll survive that. Off-ball linebackers, middle linebackers, looking at Levante David up first, Devin White behind him. Servassier Dennis is currently holding our 3rd spot on the off-ball linebacker spot, and then KJ Britt behind him. And I will say that while I could see Servassier Dennis overtaking KJ during the season, I do believe that KJ Britt will enter the season as the first middle linebacker backup on the field when they need them. But both these guys are going to mainly be special teams guys from the jump. But I do think that, Servassier Dennis, we're all excited for him. I was excited for him. We talked about him pre-draft. So we're obviously very excited about him joining the team. But we still need to remember he's a day 3 draft pick for a reason. And it's not because he's bad. It's just because he's raw. He's got some developing that he needs to do. KJ Britt has been in the league, been around a little bit. And I know he's had some rough spots on defense when he's gotten out there. But the bottom line is they put him out there, and they put him out there again, which shows the coaching staff has trust in him. And again, taking another step forward this year potentially, I think keeps KJ Britt ahead of Servassier on the depth chart, at least to start the year, and then we'll see how Servassier develops during the season.
Yeah, I can absolutely see that. I think the potential for Servassier is really, really high. But I could see, as you said, kind of entering the season, this is a young guy getting his legs under him. I could see KJ Britt starting the year a little bit ahead of him on the depth chart. Again, this is Servassier is going to have to be a guy that will contribute on special teams. But you and I both sat down and we were trying to watch film on Kalijah Cansey, and Servassier Dennis kept popping up, and he was so impressive. Needs to translate to the NFL level.
Yeah, absolutely. Moving to cornerbacks, Carlton Davis III, Jamel Deaner, your 2 starting cornerbacks. Zion McCollum, 3rd on the depth chart, probably your starting nickel. D. Delaney is in there. Josh Hayes, Scott Reynolds' favorite player, is also making the initial 53 and on the depth chart. Safeties, we're looking at Antoine Winfield Jr., Ryan Neal, your 2 starters. Nolan Turner behind them. And then we're putting in Kayvon Merriweather as our final safety on the initial 53 and depth chart. But Christian Izien from Rutgers is someone certainly to look out for. And honestly, I think it's kind of between these two. And the team is going to have to decide from a special team standpoint, from what they need on defense, which one fits what we need the most now, which one fits what we might need later. And by the way, we'll just stash whichever one we don't keep on the practice squad and then call them up if we need them.
Yeah, I think kind of what tilted the scale for us was that Kayvon Merriweather tends to be a more natural backup for what Ryan Neal does. But again, like you said, it's these guys, when we're talking about the depth chart, the tiebreaker is special teams. Always. You have to have guys that are on the kick and the punt units to be able to field a full team. And, it was like I joked with Evan Klosky on last week's WTSP Wednesday. Stop putting Carlton Davis on punts, and he ends up getting hurt, and you don't want your starters out there for those kinds of situations. So which guys do you feel comfortable putting in if the starter goes down but also will contribute to your team even when they aren't getting on the field on offense or defense. And I think Kayvon Merriweather fits that just a little bit better, but it's not going to surprise me at all if Izien ends up shining and really stepping up. Now, I also lean a little bit towards Merriweather's size compared to Izien. He's got that 6 foot and he's a little heavier, but for a safety, I mean, Antoine Winfield Jr. doesn't fit your prototypical Todd Bowles secondary player. So, I mean, Izien is, I wouldn't say as likely as Winfield Jr. just because of the difference in talent, but it doesn't rule him out the way that you and I kind of ruled out some corners in the draft process where we kept talking about all these mocks.
Absolutely. All right. So that's our defense. And now we've got 3 specialists we've got to talk about, but it's not as clear cut as it usually is. James is going to take his turn doing the number dump that I usually do when we finish up our 53-man pre-training camp projection and depth chart projection. And we're also going to tell you our biggest training camp storylines that we are watching this week as camp gets started. That's next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
Wrapping things up here on a Monday edition of the Locked On Bucs podcast. And David, it's time to talk about some specialists before we get to some storylines. So we have 3 spots left on this roster. I think it's safe to say that our long snapper is Zach Triner. Our punter is the guy who should have been nicknamed the punt god, Jake Camarda. The question is, who is the kicker? I have numbers. It's time for us to discuss this.
Well, I'm going to make my prediction first.
Okay.
I'm going with Rodrigo Blankenship because guys who wear glasses stick together. That's my analysis. Go.
I mean, I wear glasses, just not on the show.
I don't see them.
I mean,
why are you hiding your true self?
Because
Rodrigo and I are very disappointed in you.
I'm nearly blind, so it's easier for me to see out of context than it is glasses. Anyway, last season, Chase McLaughlin, 83.3% on his field goals, 100% on his extra points, and he had a long of 54 yards. Okay, that's pretty solid. Now, Blankenship was injured most of last year, so I went and I looked at his career numbers because we all remember, how good he was with the Colts and how effective he was. That wasn't there last year. This year, he's fully healthy, but these are the numbers that he put up over his career. 83.9% on his field goals, so just a little bit better than what McLaughlin did last year. 93% on his extra points, but only a career long of 53. And then I started thinking, you know what? This isn't quite fair. I'm giving Blankenship the scope of his career versus what Chase did just last year alone. So let's look at Chase's career numbers, where he drops to 78.8% on field goals, still 98% on extra points. You got to love that. Career long of 57. But this is what was mind-blowing to me. And you were sitting there going through stuff, and I just kept saying, these numbers don't make any sense. These numbers don't make any sense. He is 19 for 32 in his career from 40 to 49 yards. He has a better field goal percentage from 50 plus than he does from 40 to 49. And say what you will about Ryan Suckup, like he got to a certain threshold and it's like you don't want him on the field to kick these field goals. It doesn't really look like Chase McLaughlin is going to be much better in that range. So as much as it pains me to not go with the Fighting Illini, I think Rodrigo Blankenship's going to win this job.
Let's go. Glasses guys unite.
It just, I'm the emotional part of me wants an Illinois player on the Buccaneers. I mean, Keyshawn Vaughn played for Illinois, but then he transferred. But when you take a look at what Chase has done over his career, I think they're going to want the consistency. And although Blankenship's range isn't quite as long into the 50s, the consistency when he's healthy is better. And I think that's really what it's going to boil down to.
I mean, look, Keyshawn Vaughn, Illinois legend, just like Joe Burrow, Ohio State legend.
No.
We can do it. Listen to me. Joe Burrow, first of all, Joe Burrow graduated from Ohio State. Just putting that out there. Joe Burrow is an Ohio State Buckeye grad, alumnus. So
you see this? You see what
want.
happens when I put glasses on? Everything reflects, and now everybody can see the screen. This is why I don't wear glasses.
All right. Biggest storylines coming into the first week of training camp. James, I'm going to start because you talk too much. Running backs for me. We need to figure out this running back situation. Rachaad White's number one. Look, I love it, obviously, as an Arizona State Sun Devil myself, but he can't do it by himself. Like the days of having a running back are gone as far as I'm concerned. The Tennessee Titans are absolutely rolling the dice every single year. They come in with only Derrick Henry. And eventually, unfortunately, it's probably going to catch up to them, and it's going to catch up to Derrick, and that's going to be bad for him. But time and time again, we see these teams who try to go out there with one running back, and they end up faltering because the guy either breaks down or everybody picks up their system, whatever it is. You have to have a multiple running back system in order to be successful in the NFL today, for the most part, right? Generally speaking. So who's that guy going to be? Who is going to be the understudy? Who's going to be the guy that helps Rachaad White? Who's going to be Robin to his Batman? That's what we need to figure out. Right now, we're penciling in Keyshawn Vaughn. Could it be Chase Edmonds? Could it be Sean Tucker? Sure, it could be all of them, to be quite honest with you. But we need to figure out who it's going to be. So that's what I'm watching the most as we get started.
So it's not going to be Dalvin Cook? That's what you're saying?
I mean, at this point, no. But I mean, I guess if he's going to play football this year, he's got to sign somewhere in the next 48 hours.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen. Anyway, I still lean that Sean Tucker is going to be the Robin to Rashaad's Batman before too long. But again, we'll see how things go. Maybe Keyshawn, knowing now that he doesn't have to overcome Rachaad and Lenny to be able to get in that 1-2 punch category, is going to give him a little extra juice. And all of a sudden, we're going to see a side of Keyshawn that we haven't seen yet. I don't know. I'm still putting my money on Sean Tucker, but all of you also know how bad my bets are. So maybe go ahead and fade that. My biggest storyline heading into training camp is who is going to emerge as the starting nickel. Now, my gut tells me it's going to be Zion McCollum. He struggled a lot. He did. He struggled as a rookie, but we all know, and David, you and I have talked numerous times about how difficult of a defense Todd Bowles has, especially on players in the secondary, how difficult it is to learn and grasp and understand. And usually you see kind of a jump in their play in the second year in that system. Well, now McCollum is combining the second year in the system with the second year in the NFL. And we've talked about how much his teammates like him, how athletic and smart they think he is. So I'm looking for him to make that jump. However, we've also seen D. Delaney in this defense be a better player on the field on Sundays than we saw out of Zion McCollum. So this job isn't being handed over to the second-year guy. He's going to have to earn it, because now D. Delaney, with Sean Murphy-Bunting gone, sees his opportunity to become a full-time starter in this defense as the nickel guy. And he's going to want to seize that opportunity. So there is going to be a very, very difficult battle between these two. I don't put Josh Hayes in this category yet. He may surprise, but to me, it's a 2-horse race heading into camp, and it's going to be real interesting to see what is thrown at these guys, no pun intended, to figure out who's going to emerge as the starter.
No, absolutely. I think Zion, like you said, has the inside track on the job. But don't sleep on D. Delaney, and we'll see. What I like about Zion, what I remember last year about Zion that I liked, and again, in game, there were definitely some times where you saw the rookie come out of it, but for the most part, he was usually where he's supposed to be. And to me, that's the hardest part, is understanding where you were supposed to be for your assignment. After that, it's about getting the right break, getting the right jump, getting the right deflection, all of those things. So I think, if that's where you got to clean up, that's better than just a dude out there lost looking like William Jackson, who doesn't know who Amon-Ra St. Brown is in the back of the end zone all of a sudden.
Yeah. And, fingers crossed that Josh Hayes turns out to be better than another Josh that the Buccaneers took out of Kansas State. With that, we are going to go ahead and get out of here. We will be back tomorrow. Rookies reporting to training camp today. We'll let you know if anything comes of that, and continue to prep you for training camp starting this week. That's right. It's almost August, which is almost September, which is football season. Let's go. Until then, of course, you can send us any questions, reactions, thoughts, topics, anything at all to lockedonbuckspodcast@gmail.com or slide in the DMs on Twitter at Locked On Bucs. We want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every single day. Make sure you check out everything David is doing over at BucsGameDay.com. I'm at BucsNation.com, and everything is on Twitter at JYarcho_Bucs, at DHarrison82, and at Locked On Bucs. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. We thank you so much for joining us right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.